at some point in all of that fighting. I did a little bit more enchanting on things, just seeing what I could put on that legendary sword, and I got sharpness, but I think the fire aspect's going to do most of the work here. All right, new horse, your turn. That new horse was actually awful, so I didn't even bother bringing them along, instead working on foot. Once again, just trying to hold the horde back from this side of the river, and then swimming across to get an idea. It turns out my first horse's death was basically the catalyst it needed to fully overtake the entire village. I don't know how it was that bad from one mob's death, but I spent all, and I mean all of day 79 just fighting mobs here and trying to get an idea of how bad it was. I'm throwing down purifiers, just trying to hold back the line, carve a path, or at least stop the growth where it stands, force it back underground, force it to redirect in another direction that wouldn't potentially lead to another village. And by the time I was halfway through the day, I was making good progress. As I would get close to the village, I was getting more messages, which meant this is where the raid target was, but it felt like there was a secondary raid of sorts going on right now. I was kiting the Ravagers. That's the biggest damage dealing threat to these purifiers that I have to worry about, making sure that their aggro was on me and not what they're getting rid of. As I kept the attention of a lot of the aggressive mobs in this area, the final wave completed and I once again failed successfully. Despite not actively being there and protecting the village, I was doing a great job at protecting the village. Just pat myself on the back a little bit there. That feels nice. But 2 days worth of fighting seemed to make a difference here. As it started getting a little bit later though, I collected up all of the purifiers just to make sure that I wouldn't lose any, having a quick nap because my supplies were starting to run a little low. But the next morning, things were gonna get a little weird. Wait, what? Why am I hearing Minecraft music? So it's kind of weird having a soundtrack to this because one of the first things I usually do is turn off music so I don't need to worry about the mod packs. But I'm just trying to figure out where that was coming from. Something down there is playing Minecraft music and I have no idea what. I made my way down into the caves underneath, which were, no surprise, infested with skulk all over. But the interesting thing was one very musical creeper. Was it just a musical creeper? Was it just like some sort of party? What was that? Genuinely, what was that? Probably shouldn't let the purifier alone. Oh, it's alive. Okay, good. Oh, but it's growing more that way again. With that distraction done, I was back to fighting off against the fungus that, you know, wants to control everything in the world and consume the entire world and make all things skulk because that's what it really wants to do. I had to be careful because as I was starting to push back further and further, I eventually got to the point where I was seeing a skulk Enderman boss bar, and if that thing started blasting me, I was gonna start dying. Oh, there it is. My only hope right now is that it stayed focused on the villagers somehow, while I was focusing on killing or at least consuming, burning up a lot of the mass to make it fight me instead of being able to focus on growing. And everything was going really well. I was making a lot of progress until it started raining. The fire damage that's able to be dealt to these mobs from my sword or the purifier was the only thing that was really helping, so I had to retreat. And I'm glad I did, because if you take a look at my armor, it was just about to break. And this all is pretty good on enchants, so I want to make sure that I'm saving it. I ran my way back over to the village and was just taking stock of what I had, knowing that I had some upgrades to do in the morning. So the following day, I focused on enchanting things, getting a fully enchanted bow. It's only power 4, but that should be more than enough to cover the bases, and focusing on crafting up additional versions of my armor, getting some base enchants on there, hoping for some additional combinations, and getting things repaired, or at least I would if I had the experience to do so. So that forced me to go on a little bit of an experience gathering spree. First things first was just breeding some mobs, and then I decided to do a little bit of exploring. I'm thinking if I can go down, I need more diamonds to be able to repair all of my armor, and underwater caves are my best bet. Using magma blocks to be able to breathe, I just swam from place to place to place, eventually digging up into a cave via a geode that I saw exposed, and then seeing a mine shaft off in the distance because of course I found a mine shaft again. This one had a spawner inside, which is good news for me. I could maybe make that into a farm, although it's a little bit late in the playthrough to potentially test that. So instead I just focused on grabbing all of the diamonds, any gold that I found, and any golden apples as a freebie so I can make more purification shards. I still collected any other treasure that might be potentially valuable, but those are the main things that are impactful for what I really want to do, because before these 100 days are up, I want to go take on the ancient node and try to cure this world from the actual problem that we see here. But after finding another spawner with another musical zombie here, I killed them, getting a backpack with a jukebox upgrade, which I was able to put into my main backpack, and now I can play Minecraft music whenever I want, even though I very rarely do. But I continued mining around for additional diamonds and hitting up any loot chest that I can find, getting a very lucky break. Oh, that is huge. Sharpness 5. And a blue bomb. Also, I was muted, but that jukebox player is sick. This honestly feels like a really nice break from the endless squishy horde of death. That sharpness book was going to make a massive difference. Being able to just do more damage, eliminate mobs a little bit faster, is that much quicker I can burn down the mass of the horde and potentially make an impact, especially if I'm going to attack the more highly fortified areas that are going to be filled with more and more mobs. I spent the whole day basically just caving. It was a nice distraction from the apocalyptic events that were happening up there on the surface, even though if you check the map as I'm looking at it right now, all of the damage I had done to the village earlier had fully regrown and then some. I didn't notice it at the time, but taking my attention away from the constant battle against the horde was going to cost me dearly. But once I returned back up to the surface, had a quick nap, and then focused on recrafting everything, I was able to make new and additional versions of my chest plates and boots, getting them enchanted, focusing on a little bit of TNT from the creepers, smelting up all of the gold that I could, breeding all of the mobs, and then going out in search for additional apples to be able to make more golden apples for more purification flasks. All the meanwhile, having this deforestation serve the additional benefit of having less plant matter for the horde to absorb when it eventually, inevitably, crossed the river again. Once I had everything I needed supply-wise, at least physical supplies, it was time to go mining for experience, and well, wouldn't you know, I happen to know some blocks that happen to drop experience if you hit them with a hoe that happen to be multiplying at an extremely rapid rate and are readily available right here on the surface. So I spent a good portion of day 85 just mining up Skulk to get myself all the way back up above and beyond on level 30, dealing with whatever mobs were spawning. I was still around the dormant node, so they were kind of lower tier, and believe me, I was also mining up leaves whenever I could to try to get more apples. It was kind of a very hoe-centric kind of a day. Do I safely think I can put that line in the video and none of you will make a joke out of it? No. No, I don't. Am I going to include that line in the video regardless? Yes. Yes, I am. Now, once you all have your minds out of the gutter, I'm continuing fighting off the Skulk horde, using that same hoe to be able to push things back when my shield broke. That puts me in a pretty big disadvantage here. See, there were multiple Ravagers. One, I can tank, I can kite around, I can deal with even one hit from it, because in the cooldown of it being able to hit me again, I can basically kill it. 3, cover each other's cooldowns pretty well, and those hit really hard. Once I was able to clear them, I made my way back around and figured with the growth being so aggressive to the north and the west, the new grave mine site was probably down underneath on that side instead of in the caves that I had pretty thoroughly explored at this point. Plus, everything was touching at this point, so it was all one big pile of goop anyway. But before I'm going to be able to go tackle that, I'm going to need more supplies. I crafted myself up a diamond shield to allow myself a little bit extra defense, and then went home taking whatever I could as far as the enchanting to get some basic enchants on all of my armor and then get that combined, and then went back to fight the horde some more to get my levels back up because I was basically spending them right away. Didn't seem to matter if I fought them in the day or the night, so I just did a little bit of nighttime Skulk battling, you know, to mix things up, eventually finding a horse that I had left in a pit somewhere. Please leave a comment when I parked this horse here and how long they were waiting, riding them back to home, and then getting some additional enchants on my chest plate, and then adding that sharpness 5 book to my sword. Day 87, I was looking at the map, trying to get an idea of where the skulk had all grown to, when in looking around, I saw the tiniest indication of a nether portal at the very furthest south, just barely in my render distance. And I need more purifiers if I'm going to continue fighting back against the horde. So I jumped on my horse, jumped off a cliff into some water, and then rode my horse all the way through the entire known world, getting to a single nether portal at the edge of what I had explored that had everything I needed. Yes. Oh, huge. There's 4 pieces here. Oh, this is huge. Actively restricting myself from the nether for this challenge really forced me to take it on in a different way. If I would have had piglins, I would have been able to just do bartering to get crying obsidian, but this forced exploration, and that's why I have the nether off in my version of the pack. I think it's better for it. But I made my way all the way back towards the village because in its current form, it's not entirely useful to me. I have to do a little bit of, trickery first. I used a purification flask to push everything back, placing down the crying obsidian, and then trying to bait mobs closer to it, thinking if I can get the right one to die pretty close, like this skulk creeper, everything would be infected. And that worked for 3 out of 4 pretty quickly. Oh, yes, that worked perfectly. So I mined all of that up and then just did a little bit more battling here when I saw the message. A skulk enderman had spawned, the boss bar was right there. It was right on my head. So I killed whatever was super close by, took a quick nap, and then figured it's basically now or never. So I crafted up all of the purifiers that I could, realizing that I had miscalculated. 3 of those. Okay, we're short on resin. We need more resin. Checking around in the area that I was in, there were several hives relatively close by, and if I could push to any one of them, I could unlock the resin with just a simple pair of shears, meaning that I could continue pushing and just building wave after wave after wave of purifiers, with each kind of covering the line of the previous one and really making a dent. A true curing of the area, not just trying to prevent infection, really fighting back. I spread things out pretty thin, having to constantly bounce back from one to the next to the next, eventually getting to the point where the hives were being disinfected, or at least all of the ground around them, getting an additional 2 more crafted right after that, meaning I could bolster with reinforcements. Once I had everything I needed from the hives, I would actually break them to try to slow down the growth even further, fighting through the horde, and now having multiple of these down, even an army of 4 or 5 Ravengers, something that had held me back, caused me to run just a few days earlier, and now something that I was just standing there tanking and taking out. And after a good day's work, a full day's work, mind you, take a look at that map. Take a look at the hole we had punched into the skulk's line, and we were holding it. That progress continued into the next day. I was actually able to pick up some of the rearmost purifiers, moving them forward, leapfrogging, and continuing to invest even further into this offensive. Eventually, I got to the point where I was taking out multiple hives. I was able to get all of the resin I need and then destroy them, making real progress. I'm making progress. But the thing I didn't realize is that had come at a cost, and my boots had broken. Boots can be repaired. Oh no, my boots broke. So that was potentially a worthwhile trade. Some really nice sneakers or the fate of the universe. I know what a lot of people would say, but for this specific situation, I was feeling altruistic. So I just pushed forward, and the horde was trying to push back through wave after wave after wave of mobs, or multiple hives spawning basically right on top of each other, right at the edge of the current purified zone. At day 90, with just 10 days left in this world, I finally felt that this was at least somewhat even footing. One very decked out and dangerous boy versus a billion skulk spores? One big hive mind? 1v1 doesn't sound as impressive, but let's go with it because, they basically are. The problem was, though, the ground that I was starting to cover and really trying to punch through and bifurcate the skulk forces, there were small gaps in the area on my rear flank, which meant that it was able to reinfect. The purifiers were being spread out over too much ground. I wasn't able to fully cover everything, which meant I needed to kind of readjust my tactics slightly. I did a lot more manual disinfection, I was fighting a lot more mobs, having to go back and replace purifiers on my rear because spore spewers were spawning in, trying to retake the land that I had covered. But considering that it had moved from the aggressive mobs to the more growth-based ones, made me think I was on the right track. If I was changing the Horde's behavior, it was adapting to what I was doing, and it knew direct confrontation wasn't working anymore. The problem is, just as everything was going right, nature had to throw a spanner in the works.
Oh no, not rain. Not now.
No! So since I couldn't do a lot as far as pushing back now and losing damage over time, the damage from the purifiers, I picked up everything that I could, recollected, and slept on the other side of the river. Because 6 days of solid combat meant that I needed to repair my stuff. The shield I had just made was less than a quarter health, a lot of my armor was pretty damaged, and I needed to do some re-upping on golden apples and purification flasks. And I made some discoveries along the way.
To deactivate the ancient skulk node. Yo, wait, I didn't read that. I can attack the original node.
First things first though was upgrading both my boots and my pickaxe so I'd be able to harvest things a little bit faster. Realizing I had to infect another bit of crying obsidian, I threw some unbreaking on the shield considering I didn't have any diamonds or anything else left to repair it. I was pretty spent at this point. But I headed back up north, going to plop down the crying obsidian and kind of taking this stupid route, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, that was stupid, but funny. And it turns out the skulk had taken advantage of my one-day break and had already reclaimed over half of the land that I had purified. It took me 6 days to fight to make that much space, and it took it less than 1 to regain half of it. I spent some time kiting mobs around, just trying to get a creeper close towards that one piece of crying obsidian, eventually doing so very late in the evening, using that to get an infected block, and then kind of realizing live what I just told you in voiceover.
It regrew over half of what it defeated in a day. That took me 5 to make that progress. This is impossible. There's no defeating this without taking on the main node. And it's raining. Well, that matches how I feel.
And the ominous rain reflected on another tragedy that was about to befall me. After all of that, my horse gets eaten by a freaking tiger! Are you kidding me?
That horse survived the freaking apocalypse. It gets eaten by Raishan or something. I don't know. Whoever the tiger is from Jungle Book.
Now stranded without a ride, having nothing to be able to easily get over the mountain, I figured I'll just spend a little bit more time today mining up everything that I can over here, trying to get myself back up for one final round of enchants before I focus on attacking the main ancient node. It was going to be the most heavily fortified position, the most infected area of the entire map, been literally growing since day one, so I figure I needed everything I could possibly get. But once I was done here and I headed back up over through the cherry blossom biome and back towards home, I noticed some familiar cyan just a little bit south.
Oh, no, that's the problem. Oh, this is south.
I thought, let's not even bother with flasks. I threw down purifiers immediately. There was no summoners on the surface, which made me think that this was the very, very early stages of an emergence, and I had potentially caught it just in time when a Skulk Enderman spawned, and it was definitely hunting, most likely around the area that I had been fighting the Skulk in for most of the past 15 days or so. Hoping that that was the case, just trying to get visual confirmation of that while the purifiers ran, I climbed up over the mountain just trying to peek around, and I didn't see anything right away, which gave me a little bit of a respite. But this area was covered in spores. While there might not be anything on the surface, there was enough to give me the lure effect, which meant that they were relatively close to the surface. This wasn't just growth from deep down. There's probably a cave right underneath here, and a quick bit of mining down showed that that was the case. It was pretty heavily infected with 4 spewers relatively close to the surface.
Oh my god, this is so many.
I spent some time just trying to take out whatever I could using the purifier to push back and push down the skulk deeper underground. This was more of a surgical strike, where everything that I was doing in just trying to take everything out around the village was more generally explosive. The somewhat more methodical approach was definitely going to be important for clearing things up this far south. I did almost forget about the lure effect before returning to my village though, which could have been disastrous.
Oh shoot. I think I might have just led them directly to this village. If the Enderman scouts from here, there's no way it doesn't notice it. I mean, it's already growing this way. This village is on borrowed time.
Knowing that I likely potentially didn't have much longer here, I crafted up another sword, checking out what enchants it would get, getting some unbreaking, which would allow me to keep my sword for a little bit longer, which was definitely going to come in handy. I named it the Skulk Slayer because that is very much what it's been doing, pulling the weight of these 100 days, getting my armor buffed up with just the few loose diamonds that I had. I don't have mending, I don't have anything else along those lines. We're rolling pretty thin. It is the true apocalypse. And day 94, it was time. It was time to see if I could cure this thing once and for all. I made my way through all of the forests, over all of the hills, back towards spawn, seeing that it was growing further out and the map had just barely updated, but it was just kind of probably on the edge of what was rendered from the spawn chunks. The only thing that was really saving grace for this world, that this hadn't grown from here and infected everything. I slowly made my way around the perimeter, trying to find an area where I could punch in and establish a beachhead. There's nothing really safe, so I thought, let's take this a little bit more overtly. Putting down a purifier on that side of the river, waiting for a whole bunch of mobs to spawn in, and then sneaking my way out and around, basically sacrificing my forward attacking unit to be able to establish something a little bit closer in, where I made a platform up on the top of several of the trees, like I had done with some of my initial purifiers on the southern beachhead of the river, and just started letting that do its work. A bunch of mobs spawned in, they were all aggressive as they could be, but they couldn't reach up here, which meant that all I had to do for the moment was just kind of pick them off and wait. Try to understand where the forces were coming from, predict, take them out, and then get a second purifier down. And then a third. But I fought throughout the whole night, going into day 95, where I remembered, oh yeah, I had left some obsidian here, so there's a couple more purifiers that I can make from that. Now feeling a little bit safer, I put down multiple onto the surface, definitely drawing more ire from the skulk mobs that were around and having to much more actively patrol around everything, but now having everything's attention, getting myself a little bit of an area that I cleaned out and purified that I could potentially operate out of. Now, I don't think there's any chance of me curing spawn, at least not from here, and not while the ancient node pulses underground. So this is, if anything else, a distraction to force it to be regrowing and spawning mons up here on the surface, so for when I finally decide to head underground and make a break for it, the horde would potentially be focused elsewhere. The following morning, I figured it was time. This was as good a chance as any as I was going to have. There was a lull in mob spawning, which made me think that it was busy gaining more mass before it could spawn more mobs on my face. I set up a small chamber, throwing down a purifier in a box inside of it, thinking that will hopefully protect it while I'm underground, far away, and unable to fight directly. Once the first wave of mobs had finished spawning, I threw down a second purifier, also in another box, finding the spot where I'd gotten to that hive 80 days ago. Imagine how long and how much effort it took to just mine into this one block, and now we are actively curing and purifying a major swath of land here. Just goes to show how much progress we made over this 100 days. But I found my way down into a cave, started mining down in a simple 2x1 tunnel, and then straight down vertically like you never ever should do, eventually entering a large chamber with a massive deep slate structure hidden within. You could just barely hear a heartbeat from up this far, knowing that once I get closer, the oppressive thumps of the skulk horde were going to be all around me. I bridged out to get a little bit closer, finding a spot where I could get some water down and then ride that water column down to the uppermost layers of the citadel, mining my way in through the edges to just see what was here. It was deeply infected. The heartbeat was ever present, and the spores just hung in the air. This is where everything had started. There's basic spawners and everything, because normally you interact with it. But for me, the horde was just triggered remotely and set loose to consume this world and potentially me. I grabbed whatever loot I could find, the gunpowder being one of the things I was happiest about, using that to craft up a few more blocks of TNT, thinking that if all else fails, we just start blasting and explode our way out of here. It took over a day to loot some of the upper levels as I continued delving deeper down, the skulk growth getting thicker and more intense with each layer descended. Eventually it got to the point where the zombies were spawning, forcing me to trigger sensors, and fighting them off had me on fire and worried about a few more dangerous things. And then the warden spawned. Now when you fight a warden in an ancient city, it's big, it's open, you have space to run around, but there's a small, cramped, confined quarters, very short sight lines. So if it came around the corner, I was dead. And the two heartbeats intermingling with each other, it's just this awful, unnerving chorus. Hearing the whines, the moans of the warden combined with the more dangerous things that I knew lurked underneath had me really worried that I would not survive this. I heard the warden's attack charge and then blast away, thankfully not aimed in my direction.
Oh my god.
And then the two heartbeats together, almost pounding as hard as my own, I entered the final chamber, the ancient skulk node suspended amongst tendrils of that fungus, just right there in the middle of the room. But I had to be smart. There were still sensors here. There were still mobs being spawned in defense. I fought my way through the first wave and then threw down some blocks to keep myself protected. I had to be careful about the sound that I was generating, that it wouldn't attract the warden above, and also wouldn't spawn more mobs, but I had to kill them because those mobs themselves were already pretty dangerous. I threw down a purifier here, thinking as long as everything's aggressive, we might as well give it a good reason to be, and that would help me push back against the summoners. Disinfecting some of the wood around here, having dirt and grass be right here next to the source of all evil in this world. Once there was an opening, I pillared myself up on cobblestone, stood in front of the ancient node, and went to end this terror, and failed.
No. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Oh, this can't be happening. This was supposed to be the big finale. My big success. Oh, sure, I'll take a god apple, why not? No, 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 no. I was supposed to win here. What do I do?
If I couldn't defeat the node here until I attacked every other node in the world, and given how fast and aggressive those nodes spawned, this felt like a losing gamble. It felt like I'd almost been tricked. I've been trapped. I thought that this would be where I had to go, what I had to do, and I failed. And just as I was starting to come to terms with that, it sounded like the warden was closing in. Thankfully, it seemed to be aimed at something else, so I mined my way out through the ground and then over and across, climbing up some of the water to avoid the ravagers that were here, and then just punching a hole up to the surface, mining my way up as fast as I could as I watched the skulk actively regrowing over the space that I had protected, making me think that the purifiers that I had up here had failed. By the time I got up to the surface, it was already almost the middle of the night, and I could hear mobs everywhere, as far as the eye could see. Creepers and zombies tried dropping into the hole to kill me, and I could see ravagers flanking my potential surfacing point. I ended up using a flask and the skulk horn that I had crafted to eventually cause the briefest of windows, breaking down the skulk that was guarding my tunnel, dealing with one final zombie, and then just running as fast as I could, not caring about whatever sensors I set off. I made my way into the middle of the area that was still just barely purified, pillaring up against one of the trees to just keep myself away from the dangers down on the surface. But I should have been more aware of the dangers from within, above and around, the ones from across reality. Wait.
Found you.
Thank you all so much for watching. The multiverse never left. You just stopped paying attention.
you.